What's happening, fam? This is John from AF Anime, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing One Piece chapter 1032, Odin's Beloved Blade. Now, I know this review is a little bit late, so if you guys want to jump straight into the ratings portion or the discussion portion, go ahead and jump to the time that you see on the screen. So without any further delay, the first thing we're going to talk about for this week's chapter is going to be this week's cover request page. And this one's not too bad. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first one that features Yamato. It's actually of her and a bunch of black cats operating a delivery service. It's a little bit lighthearted and a little bit fun. And seeing as how she might be joining the crew at some point, it would be nice to see another lighthearted and kind of goofy character be joining the Straw Hat Pirates. So as I've said many times before, I'd much rather prefer a cover story than just request cover pages, but this one isn't so bad. So moving right along to the chapter now, we start off with Marco and Izo flying through the air, and apparently Izo is concerned about the message of the apparition or Kanjuro's creation. So it seems like he's going to be joining Yamato and the others in that whole ordeal. And speaking of that ordeal, it appears that things are really starting to pop off in that location. I mean, there currently we got Yamato, we got Apu, we got X Drake, we got the number Fuga. And by the third or fourth page of this chapter, we see that Robin, Brook, and the CP0 members are now joining the fray on the second basement level as well. And on top of that, Kanjuro's flaming apparition is making its way onto that floor, which as it does, it appears to set the two CP0 members aflame. However, it doesn't do much to hold them back since they get up fairly quickly, and when they see Apu snapping photos, they quickly attack him. And when they do, they actually use the Shigen technique, which is also known as the finger pistol technique, and they put him down pretty quick. Now, I gotta say, with Apu taking those photos with the intent to sell them to Morgans for some profit, it makes a kind of interesting dynamic for his character, which I'll address more of that toward the discussion portion of this video. But while Apu is down, they actually begin to target X Drake, and there's some interesting dialogue that kind of implies that the secret organization that Drake is with is on bad terms or even being watched by the world governments and the CP factions. And they begin to make their move to attack Drake before Apu interrupts with a boom attack and hits him right in the face. And after saving Drake with that devil fruit attack, it appears that Apu gives us the confirmation that he is a user of armament hockey. And then we get a small amount of banter here before Drake and Apu officially team together and take on the two CP0 members. And what's more, with this whole situation on the second basement floor, we also see that Yamato is looking to employ the help of Fuga. And that's a pretty interesting dynamic because it makes me kind of wonder what the relationship between these numbers and the Ogre Princess might be. But yet again, I'll save that for the discussion. So we get a pretty cool panel of Drake and Apu teaming together against the Cypher Pole members before we go to the outside of the dome where Zoro and King are fighting. And with this chapter, this fight actually starts off in a pretty weird way by showing us King pulling back on the crest of his head and misshaping his face. And in doing so, he uses a move called Imperial Deep Pride Stake. And this move really isn't too different from what Queen did when he dislodged his neck and almost in a snake form and darted toward Sanji. And even when Zoro mentions how weird that is, he says that this is how, Pterodons fought back in the day. Or at the very least, how they hunted their prey. And to me, this is getting kind of comical or a little bit interesting because I'm actually curious as to if Oda actually believes that dinosaurs dislodged their necks and attacked with headbutts and, darting moves. But I'm not one to complain because this here is hands down my favorite panel of the chapter. In any case, regardless of how goofy this attack looks, it is rather effective as Zoro can't really block it. And on top of that, you got King looming overhead waiting for an opportunity to strike. Now, from the ground level, Zoro tries to use his move 360-pound Phoenix to catch King in the air, in which case he misses. So Zoro correctly rationalizes that he needs to get King to the ground before he can properly defeat him. And to do that, he uses a three-sword style attack called Black Rope Dragon Twister. But it doesn't really have an effect since the slashes within the twister are being blocked by King's wings. So after that failure, we get a little more dialogue where Zoro tries to confirm with King that the dinosaur and dragon type Zoans are incredibly tough. Then we get an interesting quote from King stating that when it comes to him in particular, it even goes a bit beyond that. More for the discussion, I guess, but we see that Zoro is being a little uncharacteristic in the sense that he's actually trying to think this one out. Now, King does a semi-honorable thing and reverts back to his regular form and engages Zoro in a sword fight. And then we get some lines from Zoro where he basically says that if he can figure out what race King is, that should help him defeat King. That's an interesting concept, but I don't really see how that could be relevant. It should be interesting to see how Oda kind of sets us up for that. But that might not even matter, as we see from Zoro that a shamisen is playing somewhere, and it would seem that the namesake of this chapter, Odin's beloved sword, is reacting to that shamisen playing. Now, it has some odd effects around the design. It's not possible really to tell what it is, but it would seem as if some kind of aura is emanating from the blade. Now, I suppose we'll have to wait to see what Emma is doing, because the very next thing we see before we get an answer is actually Orochi in the treasure repository. So he curiously hears the shamisen playing and figures out that it's coming from the next room. And when he peeks through, he sees none other than Komurasaki, or Hiyori as we know her. And Orochi actually tears up and is pining over Hiyori, or Komurasaki, and she plays into it. And this is very interesting for a multitude of reasons. And the first one off the top of my head that I can think of is because she wants to kill that dude. And that is actually how we end the chapter. Now, as per usual, we're going to go ahead and get into the rating portion. And as always, I'm going to start with the artwork. And the artwork for this chapter, I'm going to go ahead and give that a 9. Overall, the art in this chapter was very impressive. It was really good. It's nothing really super dynamic or, not perfect per se, but we do get some really cool looking panels, some amazing fights. We get some, a lot of named moves between Zoro and King, and even the conflict going on in the second level of the basement floor. With Yamato and all the other characters, they're all pretty much well drawn and well designed. So again, the only reason I didn't give it a 10 is because it just really wasn't, a wowing kind of chapter in terms of artwork. Still really good, really impressive, and really fun to actually sit and read and watch. But I also feel like if they just put a little more effort into the detail for this chapter, it could have been perfect. So 9 it is. Now moving on to the story, I'm gonna go ahead and give this rating a 7. Now, ultimately, we don't get a whole lot of story development in this chapter. We do get a little bit of information about King's race, or at least the fact that they're durable. We do get a little bit of progression with the whole situation in the, in the second level basement with Yamato, Apu, and X Drake. And we also get the starts to a fight between 2 Worst Generation members and 2 CP0 members. And so while we do get the starts to some conflicts, nothing really is resolved, and it kind of just raises more questions than it gives answers. So that's the only reason why I'm rating the story as low as a 7, is because, like I said, we don't really get a whole lot in terms of narrative building. But for what we lack in narrative in this chapter, we do actually get a good amount of hype. So my next topic, obviously, is going to be the hype rating, to which I'm going to give a 10. Now, for me at least, a lot of the hype that we get for this chapter comes from the whole situation in the basement. And this is because we get to see a lot of paths being crossed in this basement with Brook, Robin, Yamato, Fuga, Apu, X Drake, CP0 members. We didn't really think that a lot of these characters would be in the same place at the same time. And we also get to see that Drake and Scratchman and Apu are now teaming up to go up against 2 formidable opponents. And even aside from that conflict in particular, we see that the situation down there is escalating now that this apparition is phasing through floors and potentially going to set off the explosives before Yamato can get there. Heck, I mean, just the first half of this chapter alone is a masterful example of how Oda can build tension and still set up fights, events, and potential doom to get us excited about the next chapter to come. And then we even get the fight between Zoro and King. Now, as I've said many times before, anytime we get a good amount of fighting in a chapter, I'm going to rate the hype levels pretty high. But the reason why I gave this one a perfect 10 is because we get the tension hype from the first half of the chapter, and then we get the entertaining fight hype from the last half of the chapter. And Oda even actually manages to get us excited or hyped for the next chapter by showing us that Emma's about to do something crazy, and Komurasaki is potentially also about to do something crazy. So I personally gotta say that Oda just did an amazing job in terms of building the hype for this chapter, and that's why I'm gonna give it a perfect 10. Alright, and now that we got those 3 out of the way, we're gonna get the average of those 3 ratings and give the overall rating for chapter 1032 of One Piece, which is going to be an 8.6. I mean, it was a good chapter. Even though we technically spent the chapter in 3 different locations, this one actually felt a little bit more, I don't know, energetic or a little more upbeat than a lot of the times where we bounce around from chapter to chapter. And as I stated, the hype is very impressive, and the cliffhanger that was pulled off in this chapter was just really good for me. So a great episode, and hopefully Oda keeps this up, keeping the hype levels high, even though we're not really paying attention to the big elephants in the room in the form of Big Mom and Kaido. All right, so now that the ratings portion is out of the way, we can now move on to my discussion. And the first thing that I want to discuss about this chapter is Scratchman Apu. I'm gonna be honest, up until very recently, this guy was my least favorite Worst Generation member. But I gotta say that as we get a little more reveal of his personality and his motives and his interests, he's actually beginning to grow on me a little bit. I mean, at this point, it would appear that Robin and Brooke took off from the CP0 members and got away, and this would directly or indirectly mean that Scratchman, Apu, and X-Drake are responsible for saving Brooke and Robin. And to be quite honest, unlike most One Piece fights, I honestly don't know the outcome of this one. And while we're still on the topic of this fight, another thing I want to talk about is the relationship between Drake's secret organization, which I believe is called Sword, and the CP0 or Cypher Pole. Now, we can't be 100% certain, but from the dialogue in this chapter between the CP0 member and Drake, it would appear that there is some absolute friction between these two groups, which a lot of us assumed anyway. Now, given that they tried to attack Drake, this makes things very interesting, and hopefully we can get a little bit more elaboration on exactly how deep this whole Sword agency goes and how confrontational they're going to be with the world government. I mean, because in my head canon and what I imagine most of the One Piece community would agree, I think it's fair to say that before we get to the ultimate conflict of the world government versus pirates, that the Marines will have to choose a side. And to be quite honest, at this point, it could go either way. Okay, and another point of discussion that I want to address is the whole relationship between Yamato, the ogre princess, potentially Kaido, and the other ogres. For me, I'm getting the feeling that Yamato and Kaido might have some kind of royal position or royal bloodline that might inspire or require obedience or loyalty from all the other ogres who remain in the One Piece world. And if this is the case, it poses a very interesting aspect to the power of the Straw Hat crew should Yamato join. And I only say this because Yamato flat out stated that she's not working with Kaido, and yet Fugo is still following her around as if it's out of an act of loyalty. So it'll be incredibly interesting to see how Oda develops that situation. So another thing to discuss would be the fight between Zoro and King, and I gotta say that I'm very impressed with how expansive and how tactical King can be. I mean, at first I thought maybe it's just going to be, a little bit of fighting here and there, and then Zoro will eventually just incorporate Komurasaki and cut him down. But we see in this chapter that King is very versatile. He's not just some overpowered character. And then we also have the whole situation with his race, which I'm sure we'll have revealed at some point soon, but it is interesting to see that his race is a particularly durable one, at least from the way he implies it. And I also got to say that it is interesting and fun to see Zoro using his brain a little bit more, kind of in a similar fashion to how he had to rationalize and use his thought process to figure out how Pika's devil fruit powers worked. But honestly, there's so little known about King's race, I don't see how Zoro knowing what his race is could help him cut him down even better. So moving on to my last point of discussion, and this is going to be Komurasaki or Hiyori. Now, we've seen Kaido and the Scabbards all get a turn at cutting down Orochi, but it would appear that Komurasaki might just get her wish here very soon. And to be quite honest, I think this is an incredibly appropriate end for Orochi if Oda decides to take that route. Now, obviously, when it comes to Oda, the concept of death is a fleeting one, but let's assume that Kanjuro is actually dead and that Orochi is possibly on his deathbed as well with this whole Komurasaki situation. It would be a fitting narrative for Kanjuro's last effort to fizzle out or to be stopped by Yamato and Orochi die at the exact same moment. Now, obviously, there's no telling if Oda's going to take this route, if there's going to be some twist to the whole situation, but I do think it would be an incredibly poetic end to the Korazumi clan. And so that's going to do it for my discussion and my review on this chapter. And to my knowledge, I don't think there's going to be a break next week, so I'm incredibly excited to see where the next chapter is going to go. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite part of this chapter was, or if you have anything you want to discuss in particular. Also, if you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. That would help me out a lot. Also, I apologize for the truancy on this video, but I've been a little bit busy these past couple days. And when it comes to this next chapter, I should be free enough to drop a video on the day of the chapter's official release. Anyways, thank you guys so very much for tuning in. I am John from AF Anime, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.